Good morning. While you guys are getting comfortable, if you're facing away, do me a favor and rotate your chairs so you can be a little more comfortable so you don't have this old guy talking to the back of your heads. So, maybe I missed it, but how many people are visiting today? Show of hands. Get them up there. I see 1, 2, 3. All right. Give them a hand. Make them feel welcome, all right? Hey, we are glad you guys are here. Thanks for coming. And I hope you learned something today and that it was worth your time. So I have a question. When it comes to springtime and you think of school, there's a certain item that a lot of you have put money down or your parents paid for, and it's about to show up, and it's called a yearbook. How many people bought a yearbook or have? There you go. Come on, be honest. Almost all of you, right? And if we're to be honest, what is the first picture you look for when you open up a yearbook? Sam, you know the answer. Come on. The first picture you look for is usually your own, right? You want to see where you're at in the big picture of things. And then, if you're to be more specific, I know a lot of people will then go and see how many times they're in the yearbook. Can you raise your hand and be honest and say, all right, how many times are you in it? There you go. Especially the ladies, right? You like that stuff. You're going to count. But if the guys were to be honest, they count too. They want to see how many times they're in a yearbook. Well, I thought, since we're going to be speaking on ancient history and how it applies today, I thought it would be appropriate to show a picture from my college yearbook. And if you put it up there, there you go. This was our attempt to enter one of our guys from our dorm. We were in the athletes' dorm, so we behaved a little differently than other people. And even though it was a Christian school, we decided to enter one of the guys that had the manliest beard in the beauty contest for homecoming. And so that was my car. I'm driving it, and you have to appreciate the 66 bug that I had, first of all. It was a thing of beauty. I had shoestrings tied to my windshield wipers through the little side vents, and that's how I'd work my windshield wipers when it rained. So you can picture driving country roads in Missouri as pretty safe when you're doing that. And the defroster was the ice scraper, so I would scrape little rectangles in my windshield in the wintertime so I could see out of it. And if it was a really bad case, I would roll down the window and stick out my head. That's how I drove. So, needless to say, it's amazing that I was able to meet my wife, Nancy, as a freshman and court her in this vehicle and actually land her in marriage. And so, God is good. But on this day, this is before, the 26 years of Navy SEAL knot tying experience, we took a beauty chair, if you call it. That's what that big thing is in the back where, the ladies in the movies, they put that thing on their head and it dries their hair and all that good stuff. And we lashed it down, and I gave it a sample test, and stopped on the brakes, and I launched him. The whole chair broke free, the rope broke, and he was just a bloody mess. And so we patched him with the best we could. We didn't have any first aid training. We're athletes, right? We would throw stuff down on our floor in our dorm, and we'd slide down on it, and we'd get our little $1 fine from the RA. It was worth it. It was a good time. So, the yearbook picture. My point of dragging you guys through my history is a lot of times we want to know where we fit in the conversation, right? When you look at the yearbook, you're like, how do I fit into this big picture? And today, it's my hope that I can actually explain to why I want you guys to listen. Why are you going to listen to me for the next 20 minutes or so? And I have 3 reasons that I think you should listen. The first one is that I actually care about you guys. I genuinely care about you. That's why I'm here. I care so much that I spend a lot of time praying for you guys, and I'm concerned about where you're heading down your roads. Whether you've attended church or whether this is the first time you've been in a church, I care about you because I remember the challenges that you guys face. The second thing is this message that you're going to hear today is going to matter today, and it will matter tomorrow and for the rest of your life, because you'll have decisions to make based off of facts that I'm going to present. And the third thing is a summary of 3 questions I've heard over my life that I've heard people ask over and over. And the cool thing is the Bible has the answers to these questions. So, what are these questions? If you take a look at the next slide, and fittingly there's 3 trees there. I thought this was a happy snap I took in Israel there in the coast of the Mediterranean. The questions I've heard, big macho Navy SEALs from around the world and other foreign frogmen when I've worked with them, all the way down to I remember these discussions in high school and college, is who am I, why am I here, and where am I going? The 13th century philosopher Thomas Aquinas wrote, There is within every soul a thirst for happiness and meaning. Every one of us want to matter. We really do. And that's not a bad thing. But it's important to at least capture that fact and understand it. I'm going to show you today the answers to these three questions by taking you on a quick tour of three places that I visited in Israel. And these are just some of the ones that jumped out at me that I thought would help answer these questions today. And the cool thing is, you're actually going to hear from an eyewitness. I was there. I got to see history come alive. I got to see where these no-brainer places were. I loved how our guide said it. He'd been guiding for 44 years, doing 25 tours a year. And really cool guy. He fought in the 6-day war as an Israeli soldier. And the Israeli folks, they are so hospitable. They loved on us. They took care of us. And I have some great friends over there, people I've worked with. I've worked with their military in the past. They are solid people. But this man had vast experience, and he knew God's word like nobody's business. And to hear him share these truths, to me, made all the difference for my wife, myself, and everyone else on the tour. So this is kind of a summary of an investigation that we had. Because like a lot of you, maybe you have questions. You have questions about God's word, and you're like, it's this big fairy tale. And I want to reaffirm to you that it is not, and that it is the most important document that's ever been written on the most important subject, and that's God. So let's take a look at the first place. It's called Caesarea of Philippi. Now, Caesarea Philippi is a place where Peter answered a very important question that Jesus answered him in Matthew chapter 16. And it's also going to help us answer the question, who am I? Because today, if you don't know who Jesus is, I can promise you, you're going to have a hard time figuring out who you are. So that's going to be a challenging question for you. But take a look a little closer at this village, if you will, and you see the mountain there, and at the bottom there is a cave. And at this cave is a location, it was 25 miles north of the Sea of Galilee where the Jewish community was. Now, this place was vastly different than where the clean and friendly Jewish community was on the Sea of Galilee. This was as pagan as it got. This was the red light district back in Jesus' day. And no respectable person, especially a Jewish person following the law, would ever be caught dead in Caesarea of Philippi. And yet that's exactly where Jesus took the disciples. To give you an idea of what went on there, on that mountain scattered throughout were false temples to false gods of all sorts of pagans, from the Greek god Pan, and then later on King Herod built one to Caesar. So you had all this false worship and all these horrible things taking place. The pagans believed that the cave was the gateway to the underworld, literally the gates of hell. That's what was taught, that's what they believed. And it's fitting that Jesus took the disciples, and go to the next picture. It's a close-up of the cave. That is where he had the disciples when he read this, where he didn't read this passage, but when he asked this question that was recorded in the Gospel of Matthew. Let me read this to you. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter replied, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." Now, to me, there's a little more depth when I understand the setting was literally the gates of hell where Jesus made this comment. And there's a whole nother sermon here where we could talk about all the different depth here. But the point is, each one of us have to answer that question when Jesus asks it. Who do you say that I am? Because it doesn't matter what your mom and dad say. It doesn't matter what your friends say. If you have a friend that brought you here today, that's awesome. And maybe they are following after Jesus. But the question still remains for you, who do you say Jesus is? The second place I'd like you to take a look at is Caiaphas' house and his courtyard. Now, you may remember from your Bible history that this was the high priest at the time of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And this is the courtyard. And it's a small little area, but this, as our guide would say, there can be no doubt this is the courtyard and this is Caiaphas' house. It was an amazing place to be there. We had an amazing devotion. But I take great encouragement from this because it's also a place where Peter, who denies Christ 3 times. Now, this is the same Peter who chopped off an ear of a Roman soldier and was ready to fight and give his life for Christ. But in just a short amount of time after that, literally less than 24 hours, he denies Christ 3 times. In fact, by an accusation from a little girl. So here's this guy that has walked with Jesus for 3 years. 3 years. He's seen miracles. He's seen people raised from the dead. And yet, at this moment in this trial, he still denied Christ. For me, as a fragile man, I take hope in that. But for you, for the question, if you're a believer today and you say, why am I here? That is a good question, because why doesn't God just bring you home once you figure out who Jesus is? I honestly think it is so that you can be the salt and the light, so that you can share. There are many of you here today that if your friend brought you, that friend loves you more than you know. And that friend can share with you more effectively because you get to watch their life. You get to see, as I was sharing with the class today, if they stub their toe, if they say, gee whiz, and that hurt, instead of some other popular phrases that perhaps you've heard. I'm sure your sheltered ears have never heard a bad word in high school. And the point is, they can communicate the love of God to you a lot more effectively than I can, because you don't know me, but you know them. And I think that's really cool that you're here. And it still poses the question, why am I here? For the Christian is to be a faithful witness. And if you're still agnostic, if you're still undecided, if you're still of another faith, you still have to figure out the first question, and that is who Jesus is to you. Please allow me to read this passage that took place in Peter's life. It says, Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. Since the disciple was known to the high priest, he entered with Jesus into the court of the high priest. But Peter stood outside at the door. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the servant girl and kept watch at the door and brought Peter in. The servant girl at the door said to Peter, you also are not one of the man's disciples, are you? He said, I am not. Now the servant and the officers had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing and warming themselves. Peter also was with them, standing and warming himself. And let me stop there and say that in Israel, specifically in Jerusalem, it does snow there. So a lot of times people are like, the Mediterranean, the Middle East, how could it be cold there? Having traveled all over the Middle East, I can tell you it can get very cold there. And even on our tour there in April for 2 weeks, the ladies oftentimes wore pretty decent-sized jackets at night because it got down in the 40s. So it's not a stretch. Matter of fact, 3 days before we arrived, there was 2 inches of snow in Jerusalem. So to picture around springtime when the crucifixion took place that it was cold is not a stretch. And then finally the passage, now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. So they said to him, you also are not one of his disciples, are you? He denied it and said, I am not. One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked, did I not see you in the garden with him? Peter again denied it, and at once a rooster crowed. Now, I thought what was extra special in our time in Israel is in this courtyard, everywhere we went, we had a devotion. But when we finished the devotion in the valley, we heard a rooster crow. And I thought that was pretty sweet, just to put a little dot on the end of that sentence of our time there. And again, just to anchor, wow, it's not a stretch to hear a rooster crow in this very spot. The last place I want to share with you is the Sea of Galilee and a statue there. And at the Sea of Galilee, there's another spot where Pastor Lon leads his tour and where our guide took us. And it's one of those spots where he said, there can be no doubt this is where this took place. And when you look at the geography, it makes sense to you. But this is the place where after the resurrection, one of the many places Jesus appeared and revealed himself to the disciples. And it was on this beach that he had this discussion with Peter where he restored him from those 3 times that he denied them, that he denied Jesus. It's also going to help us answer the question, where am I going? For a Christian, I can save you a lot of work. I had a talk with a very special young lady today who's thinking about the future and some some situations, and some advice that was given to me that I gave to her, and then I'll give to all of you, is that don't look for a 5-year plan in the Bible. It does not exist. God wants your obedience today. He wants your obedience today. He'll take care of the rest. Now, that's really hard for me as a military planner and as a dude that just wants to take care of his wife and kids. I want to plan. I want to put things out there. But God's always changing my plan to let me know He's in charge. And the sooner I submit to that, the more I have peace. And I could give you lots of examples of how my world's been turned upside down. But the point is, as a believer, trust God, obey Him daily, and He'll take care of the rest. Now, I have some bad news. A lot of this has been good news and encouraging stuff. But the bad news is, if you're not a believer today, if you're someone that does not have a relationship with Jesus, the Bible actually does have an answer where you're going to. And it's in a place called hell. It's eternal separation from a God that loves you. And here's the kicker. God doesn't want you to go there. He loves you so much that He wants you to be with Him. But He loves you so much that He's going to allow you to choose. And that should scare you a little bit, because a lot of times we don't make good decisions. Let me read this conversation that took place on this shore of Galilee. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." He said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. And when you're old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go." This he said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, "Follow me." Now, there's a whole nother deep message there on the different types of love that was mentioned there, and we don't have time to survey and go into great detail on those. But the point is, Jesus knew Peter's heart. He knew that he was fragile. He knew that one minute he was a gladiator with a sword ready to whack somebody for him, and then the next he's running and basically being a lot like most of us. There are days, if I'm to be honest with you, I feel like I'm the gladiator with the sword, and I'm ready to fight and take on anything for Christ. And then there's other days, I'm just like Elijah the prophet, where I'm running from Jezebel the witch, right? And I'm scared. I mean, even when we were on Mount Carmel, I was blown away at just the magnitude of this place and what Elijah got to see, right? I mean, he saw fire come down from heaven. And I got to see the brook of Kishon down the hill there, where they took all the false prophets and they slayed them. He saw this wonderful miracle. And then just fast forward a little bit, he finds out that the king's wife, Jezebel, and that's an interesting study for you if you want to look her name up sometime, that she wants to kill him because she don't like him for killing all her false prophets. And what does he do? This man of God, he runs for his life because he's scared of her. And so I take heart because the Bible's true to life. It puts these heroes of faith on display for us. We get to see how frail they are. And I find encouragement from that. C.S. Lewis, many of you know him as a famous Christian author, but a lot of you maybe don't know that he was a devout atheist as he was a professor at Oxford before he became a believer. And I love this statement he made. He said this: "Christianity, if false, is of no importance, and if it's true, of infinite importance. The only thing it cannot be is moderately important." You see, Christianity is not a religion. Religion is humans trying to work their way to God through good works. Christianity is God coming to men and women through Jesus Christ. It's from Genesis to Revelation. It's there. You can see it. God is continually reaching out and trying to show his love for you and me. Josh McDowell was another skeptic. He wrote a book called More Than a Carpenter. And while he was in college, he did a pretty good investigation where he was going to disprove the Bible. And he came up with this book that summarized his findings. And I encourage you to read it if you're struggling with who Jesus is. But in it, he basically said Jesus is either a liar, he's a lunatic, or he is Lord. He's one of those three. And the decision comes right back to you on what do you say. And the important thing is not what others say, but what do you and I personally say. The decision of the crowd can never substitute for a personal decision. The other day, matter of fact, it was Friday, I was in a hotel down in Virginia Beach wrapping up something, and I heard a conversation walk by my door as a guy on a phone, and I think it actually has merit to share with you on decision making. The guy said this: "You know why you keep smoking? Because you want to. You have to decide what's more important to you." And then, he kept walking by. But I just wrote that down when he was walking by, not to be a creeper or nothing, right? But he was just walking by, and I was like, man, that was actually pretty good. And honestly, some of you are sitting in the hot seat today, and you're still smoking, right? You're sitting with all this information, and you're not making a decision. And by not making one, you've made one. Matthew 16:26 says this: "For what will a man profit if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what shall a man give in return for his soul?" You see, whether you live to be 10 or 100, this life is brief. I've had many relatives live to the century mark, and I can tell you, speaking with them, they tell me they're like, boy, this life goes quick. And I can say, now that I'm knocking on the door of halfway there, it does go quick. And it seems to go quicker as you talk to older people. You heard there's a Kenny Chesney song, "Don't Blink," and there's all these other songs, but it talks about how fast time goes. Now, sometimes in high school, I know it goes slow, right? Especially if you're not a senior. Of course, you seniors are suffering right now too, right? Because you got a month left, and it's going to last forever. But the point is, it doesn't matter in the end what your job is, how much money you make, if you want to be famous and all that other nonsense. It's fleeting. It doesn't last. What is that going to matter when you stand before the King of Kings? So, with that, there's some responses I would like you guys to think about today. One, let me talk to the Christian that's here today, someone who's following hard after Christ. You guys need to pray, and you need to share with your friends about Jesus and those you meet. You have this great hope. And we all know, I can make up this story for you to illustrate it, and you'd all be like, well, of course that makes sense. We could be walking down the street, right, Mr. Lee? And we could be strolling down the street, and we see a house on fire. And we're like, we should do something about that. Now, even if we're just moderately good guys, we would at least call 911, right? But he's strong, he's healthy. He'd be like, stay back, old man, I'll take care of this. He'd go kick in the door, and he'd go look to see if there's anybody in there that needs rescuing. And he'd drag the women and children out, and he would do everything he could to save them, wouldn't you? You would, because you care. And yet, how many of us know people that are in that burning building? And we're like, well, I don't want to hurt their feelings because they don't believe anything. And we're just watching that house burn. So my challenge today is, if you care, think of at least 3 names today that you can start praying for. 3 people. Start there. Pray for them. Pray for their very souls. And pray for opportunities that you can share the gospel with them. Now, there's also some other things you need to deal with if you're a believer. Let me read from Luke. It says, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I tell you to do?" It's a pretty powerful passage for those of us that try to compromise in areas in our personal life. So if you're a believer today and you got an area that God's touching your heart on, challenge yourself and say, why am I still doing this? And yet I turn around and I'm going to call Jesus Lord. And finally, and certainly it's not the least important, if anything, it's the most important. If you're here today, one, because someone brought you, man, I'm telling you, they love you, they care about you. But if you're here and you haven't made a decision, I would encourage you to do that. And I would ask you, what's keeping you from trusting Jesus? Do you know there is more evidence that this man who called himself the Son of God lived than any other person that lived? None of you would deny the fact that George Washington or Abe Lincoln lived. And yet there's more evidence that Jesus Christ lived on this earth than any of those men. So what's keeping you back? I honestly think from the conversations I've had with people, it's fear. It's fear of having to change. No one likes to change. And there's this stigma that's placed upon, I'm going to have to give so much up. But I'm here to tell you, you gain everything. You gain everything. And this hope that you have by trusting in Jesus is amazing. Whatever you're clinging to, is it worth eternal separation? Is it worth your very soul? The gospel is pretty simple. It's so much so that you can share it with a child and they can get it, and you can share it with an older person and they can get it too. It's simple. You have to come to a point in your life where once you believe Jesus said who he was, that he was the Son of God, that he died for you, and that he was raised from the dead, and that's a whole nother wonderful message on that encouragement. But you have to decide, are you brave enough to admit you've sinned, which is a big fancy church word for doing something wrong? I have. I still sin. I still mess up all the time. If you can do that and acknowledge that, that's the first step. The second one is trusting that only one thing saves you, and that's Jesus. Salvation comes by Jesus and nothing else. And that's tough, right? Because that's faith. You have to put faith in Jesus, who you have not met. But I promise you, it is so worth it.